Welcome everyone. I'm continuing here my reading of Emerson's essay History, which could also bear the title Memory. I think this will probably be the last one. We're about 10 pages have we got left now. And this is the third whiskey lecture, as I've come to call them. I'm again enjoying a Woodford Reserve as we're delving deeper into the great mind that Emerson calls history and memory. In the early history of Asia and Africa, nomadism and agriculture are the two antagonist facts. The geography of Asia and of Africa necessitated a nomadic life, but the nomads were the terror of all those whom the soil or the advantages of the market had induced to build towns. Agriculture, therefore, was a religious injunction because of the perils of the state from nomadism. And in these latent civil countries of England and America, these propensities still fight out the old battle in the nation and in the individual. So we can see here that Emerson thinks that there is some sort of, let's say, genetic memory, or maybe even something deeper than just genetic memory, but a memory of the primordial state or origin of human being, which continues to fight battles, which continues to be antagonistic. The nomads of Africa were constrained to wander by the attacks of the gadfly, which drives the cattle mad, and so compels the tribe to emigrate in the rainy season and to drive off the cattle to the higher sandy regions. The nomads of Asia follow the pasturage from month to month. In America and Europe, the nomadism is of trade and curiosity, a progress certainly from the gadfly of Astaboras to the Anglo and Italomania of Boston Bay, sacred cities to which a periodical religious pilgrimage was enjoined, or stringent laws and customs tending to invigorate the national bond, were the check on the old rovers, and the cumulative values of long residence are the restraints on the itinerancy of the present day. The antagonism of the two tendencies is not less active in individuals, as the love of adventure or the love of repose happens to predominate. A man of rude health and flowing spirits has the faculty of rapid domestication, lives in his wagon and roams through all latitudes as easily as a kalmuk. At sea, or in the forest, or in the snow, he sleeps as warm, dines with as good appetite, and associates as happily as beside his own chimneys. Or perhaps his facility is deeper seated in the increased range of his faculties of observation, which yield him points of interest wherever fresh objects meet his eyes. The pastoral nations were needy and hungry to desperation, and this intellectual nomadism, in its excess, bankrupts the mind through the dissipation of power on a miscellany of objects. The home-keeping wit, on the other hand, is that continence or content which finds all the elements of life in its own soil, and which has its own perils of monotony and deterioration if not simulated by foreign infusions. Everything the individual sees without him corresponds to his states of mind, and everything is in turn intelligible to him as his onward thinking leads him into the truth to which that fact or series belongs. The primeval world, the foreworld, as the Germans say, I can dive to it in myself as well as grope for it with researching fingers in catacombs, libraries, the broken reliefs and torsos of ruined villas. What is the foundation of that interest all men feel in Greek history, letters, art, and poetry, in all its periods from the heroic or Homeric age down to the domestic life of the Athenians and Spartans 4 or 5 centuries later? What but this, that every man passes personally through a Grecian period? The Grecian state is the era of the bodily nature, the perfection of the senses, of the spiritual nature unfolded in strict unity with the body. So we can see what Emerson relates here is that he thinks that the epochs that we find in history are also the epochs or periods, the states that we go through as individuals. We all go through the Greek period where we become fully aware of our senses. By the way, note here, how this is truly in opposition to Platonism, isn't it? So again, perhaps Nietzsche was not that wrong, that Plato was indeed quite subversive. In it existed those human forms which supplied the sculptor with his models of Hercules, Phoebus, and Jove, not like the forms abounding in the streets of modern cities, wherein the face is a confused blur of features, but composed of incorrupt, sharply defined, and symmetrical features, whose eye sockets are so formed that it would be impossible for such eyes to squint and take furtive glances on this side and on that, but they must turn the whole head. The manners of that period are plain and fierce. The reverence exhibited is for personal qualities: courage, address, self-command, justice, strength, swiftness, a loud voice, a broad chest. Luxury and elegance are not known. A sparse population and want make every man his own valet, cook, butcher, and soldier, and the habit of supplying his own needs educates the body to wonderful performances. Such are the Agamemnon and Diomede of Homer, and not far different is the picture Xenophon gives of himself and his compatriots in the retreat of the 10,000. After the army had crossed the river Teleboas in Armenia, there fell much snow, and the troops lay miserably on the ground covered with it. But Xenophon arose naked, and taking an axe, began to split wood, whereupon others rose and did the like. Throughout his army exists a boundless liberty of speech. They quarrel for plunder, they wrangle with the generals on each new order, and Xenophon is as sharp-tongued as any, and sharper tongued than most, and so gives as good as he gets. Who does not see that this is a gang of great boys with such a code of honor and such lax discipline as great boys have? Almost in Winckelmannian fashion here, Emerson points out the great either epic heroes Agamemnon and Diomedes, or Xenophon, a real general, a military leader, philosopher, born in Athens, a student of Socrates, and also the military leader who led the 10,000, who marched towards Babylon and almost took the city. I say in a Winckelmannian fashion, because Winckelmann probably was the first who pointed out that we can and should indeed strive to imitate and emulate the ancients, that they stand there as ideals and idols, to be, on the one hand, of course, not ever fully reachable to us. They cannot be reached or fully imitated, but they can become our future. For Wilhelm von Humboldt, the Greeks became gods even. And I don't mean the Greek gods, I mean the exemplary human beings that we find in Homer, for example, or in someone like Xenophon. They stand and withstand the changes of history and remain deeply ingrained in our memory, which we can and must relive if we want to become genuine individuals, which, by the way, you should not conflate with crude individualism. The costly charm of the ancient tragedy, and indeed of all the old literature, is that the persons speak simply, speak as persons who have great good sense without knowing it, before yet the reflective habit has become the predominant habit of the mind. So, again, Emerson here speaks of the pre-philosophical time, we could almost say, or at least our admiration of the antique is not admiration of the old, but of the natural. And that presumably, that is the crucial sentence here. I'll read it again. Our admiration of the antique is not admiration of the old, but of the natural. The Greeks exemplify the natural hierarchy, the holy order of things. Hence we admire them. We don't admire the old, we don't fetishize the old. There's no nostalgia, let's say, for the olden days or a golden age. But there's here an admiration for what is the natural good hierarchy, the good order of things, the cosmos. This we find in the Greeks, and this we can imitate and also live by. Of course, in a different, changed manner. The Greeks are not reflective, but perfect in their senses and in their health, with the finest physical organization in the world. Adults acted with the simplicity and grace of children. They made vases, tragedies, and statues such as healthy senses should, that is, in good taste. Such things have continued to be made in all ages and are now, wherever a healthy physique exists. But as a class, from their superior organization, they have surpassed all. They combine the energy of manhood with the engaging unconsciousness of childhood. The attraction of these manners is that they belong to man, and are known to every man in virtue of his being once a child. Besides, that there are always individuals who retain these characteristics. A person of childlike genius and inborn energy is still a Greek, and revives our love of the muse of Hellas. I admire the love of nature in the Philoctetes. In reading those fine apostrophes, to sleep, to the stars, rocks, mountains, and waves, I feel time passing away as an ebbing sea. I feel the eternity of man, the identity of his thought. There is a sameness, I would say, to use a different word from Emerson. There is a sameness of thought or of thinking, that it can, especially through, speaking the image of the wave, reconnect again and find in the tidal waves of memory points of access, a fellowship with someone who we, in some sense, of course, have never met and will never met, but are still encountering. Emerson continues, the Greek had, it seems, the same fellow beings as I. Now that's a striking notion. Fellow beings. What does he mean by fellow beings? The same fellow beings as I. By fellow beings, of course, in some sense he simply refers to, as he does in the next sentence, the sun and the moon, water and fire, met his heart, that is to say, the heart of the Greek, precisely as they meet mine. However, I would add that there's something else also going on in this notion of the fellow beings. Not just, let's say, entities or things that we also encounter and that encounter us, and that Emerson encounters them in the same way or in a similar way as the Greeks did. But instead, precisely because of the identity or the sameness of thought, the meeting of thought, the meeting place of which is deep memory, we can at all, I would say, encounter through the reading of Aeschylus, Philoctetes, for example, or through reading Homer, other ways of being human that retain something of humanness also for us, and in that way can become our future, our fellow beings, our fellow way of being at all in the first place. So it is through such a reading that we get in touch with our being human. I continue. Then the vaunted distinction between Greek and English, between classic and romantic schools, seems superficial and pedantic. Exactly. When the thought of Plato becomes a thought to me, when a truth that fired the soul of Pindar fires mine, time is no more. When I feel that we two meet in a perception, that our two souls are tinged with the same hue, and do, as it were, run into one. Why should I measure degrees of latitude? Why should I count Egyptian years? Again, here's a crucial sentence here. Here, he says that two souls are tinged with the same hue. They are taken by the same. They run into one. Now Emerson says, do as it were. I would get rid of the as it were. I would say they do run into one. And this is also crucial. The oneness is not given. Instead, the oneness comes about as two souls, let's say, intermingle and meet, and hence the years disappear. And this oneness, truly, this is memory. The student interprets the age of chivalry by his own age of chivalry, and the days of maritime adventure and circumnavigation by quite parallel miniature experiences of his own. To the sacred history of the world he has the same key. The sacred history of the world. So there is a sacred history. I think the name of that sacred history is memory. When the voice of a prophet out of the deeps of antiquity merely echoes to him a sentiment of his infancy, a prayer of his youth, he then pierces to the truth through all the confusion of tradition and the caricature of institutions. Rare, extravagant spirits come by us at intervals, who disclose to us new facts in nature. I see that men of God have from time to time walked among men and made their commission felt in the heart and soul of the commonest hearer. Hence, evidently, the tripod, the priest, the priestess inspired by the divine afflatus. Jesus astonishes and overpowers sensual people. They cannot unite him to history or reconcile him with themselves, as they come to revere their intuitions and aspire to live holily. Their own piety explains every fact, every word. How easily these old worships of Moses, of Zoroaster, of Menu, of Socrates domesticate themselves in the mind. I cannot find any antiquity in them. They are mine as much as theirs. I have seen the first monks and anchorites without crossing seas or centuries. More than once some individual has appeared to me with such negligence of labor and such commanding contemplation, a haughty beneficiary, begging in the name of God, as made good to the 19th century Simeon the Stylite, the Thebaius, and the first Capuchins. The priestcraft of the East and West, of the Magian, Brahmin, Druid, and Inca, is expounded in the individual's private life. The cramping influence of a hard formalist on a young child in repressing his spirits and courage, paralyzing the understanding, and that without producing indignation but only fear and obedience, and even much sympathy with the tyranny, is a familiar fact, explained to the child when he becomes a man, only by seeing that the oppressor of his youth is himself a child tyrannized over by those names and words and forms of whose influence he was merely the organ to the youth. The fact teaches him how Belus was worshipped and how the pyramids were built better than the discovery by Champollion of the names of all the workmen and the cost of every tile. He finds Assyria and the mounds of Cholula at his door, and finds and himself has laid the courses. So again, what he stresses is that even the youngest man can find within himself, without even having read just about enough or having gone to a certain place, let's say rather, he can find within himself through, say, perhaps a certain way of studying or reading, he can find the path to the past. He can understand even what is the furthest removed. But I don't think, just to say this, that what comes through here is some sort of a perennialism or so, where Emerson tries to argue that ultimately all religions believe the same thing, but instead that we have a genuinely deep human connection to the works of other humans through the meeting place where this can take place, which again is what I refer to as memory. I continue with Emerson. Again, in that protest, which each considerate person makes against the superstition of his times, he repeats step for step the part of all reformers, and in the search after truth finds, like them, new perils to virtue. He learns again what moral vigor is needed to supply the girdle of a superstition. A great licentiousness treads on the heels of a reformation. How many times in the history of the world has the Luther of the day had to lament the decay of piety in his own household? "Doctor," said his wife to Martin Luther one day, "how is it that whilst subject to papacy we prayed so often and with such fervour, whilst now we pray with the utmost coldness and very seldom?" What the great reformers then seem to misunderstand, according to Emerson, what Luther seems to misunderstand, perhaps especially as he's here singled out and obviously one of the great revolutionaries of modernity, is that in the deepest there is a sameness at work. There is a recurrence, and we shouldn't think of this now as a cyclical history, etc. But that reform itself does not lead to piety or does not lead to greater prayer or even deeper belief or faith. Rather the opposite, as it seems. And the reason for that, it seems to be indicated, is that what Reformation or Revolution perhaps always also requires is to be cut off from memory, is to attempt to begin anew what cannot begin anew because it has no beginning and no end. The advancing man discovers how deep a property he has in literature, in all fable as well as in all history. He finds that the poet was no odd fella who described strange and impossible situations, but that universal man wrote by his pen a confession true for one and true for all. And hence also, just to comment on this, we can, for example, read Augustine or Plato or Aristotle, or even the Bhagavad Gita, Gilgamesh. Not because we are all equal and all perfectly identical across all times and all of space and all epochs, but instead that what always is at stake is that great universal mind, which is memory, which of course can transform and change as it does with every new generation of human beings that is born, but we are tied to that realm, and in so far we are human. His own secret biography he finds in lines wonderfully intelligible to him, dotted down before he was born. One after another he comes up in his private adventures, with every fable of Aesop, of Homer, of Hafiz, of Ariosto, of Chaucer, of Scott, and verifies them with his own head and hands. The beautiful fables of the Greeks, being proper creations of the imagination and not of the fancy, are universal verities. What a range of meanings and what perpetual pertinence has the story of Prometheus! Beside its primary value as the first chapter of the history of Europe, the mythology thinly veiling authentic facts, the invention of the mechanic arts, and the migration of colonies, it gives the history of religion with some closeness to the faith of later ages. Prometheus is the Jesus of the old mythology. He is the friend of man, stands between the just justice of the eternal Father and the race of mortals, and readily suffers all things on their account. But where it departs from the Calvinistic Christianity and exhibits him as the defier of Jove, it represents a state of mind which readily appears wherever the doctrine of theism is taught in a crude, objective form, and which seems the self-defense of man against his untruth, namely a discontent with the believed fact that a God exists, and a feeling that the obligation of reverence is onerous. It would steal, if it could, the fire of the Creator, and live apart from him and independent of him. The Prometheus Vinctus is the romance of skepticism. Not less true to all time are the details of that stately epilogue. Apollo kept the flocks of Admetus, said the poets. When the gods came among men, they are not known. Jesus was not. Socrates and Shakespeare were not. Antaeus was suffocated by the gripe of Hercules, but every time he touched his Mother Earth his strength was renewed. Man is the broken giant, and in all his weakness, both his body and his mind are invigorated by habits of conversation with nature. The power of music, the power of poetry, to unfix, as it were clap, wings to solid nature, interprets the riddle of Orpheus. The philosophical perception of identity through endless mutations of form makes him know the Proteus. What else am I, who laughed or wept yesterday, who slept last night like a corpse, and this morning stood and ran? And what see I on any side but the transmigrations of Proteus? Proteus was an old man who lived in the sea, subject to Poseidon, and Proteus also was he was capable of shifting shape. He sometimes had to take on his true form, but he changed form and shape, etc., transmorphed with the waves of the water, as it were. And now here Emerson likens himself to Proteus, likens every man to Proteus. I can symbolize my thought by using the name of any creature, of any fact, because every creature is man, agent, or patient. So the human being finds himself either as agent or as patient in all other beings, in all other creatures. Tantalus is but a name for you and me. Tantalus means the impossibility of drinking the waters of thought which are always gleaming and waving within sight of the soul. The transmigration of souls is no fable. I would it were, but men and women are only half human. Every animal of the barnyard, the field and the forest, of the earth and of the waters that are under the earth, has contrived to get a footing and to leave the print of its features and form in some one or other of these upright, heaven-facing speakers. Ah, brother, stop the ebb of thy soul, ebbing downward into the forms into whose habits thou hast now for many years slid. As near and proper to us is also that old fable of the Sphinx, who was said to sit in the roadside and put riddles to every passenger. If the man could not answer, she swallowed him alive. If he could solve the riddle, the Sphinx was slain. What is our life but an endless flight of winged facts or events? In splendid variety these changes come, all putting questions to the human spirit. What is our life but an endless flight of winged facts or events? In splendid variety these changes come, all putting questions to the human spirit. Just to repeat myself here again, I wanted to read this again, because what we can see here again is that the changes that do come put questions to the human spirit. The human spirit has to respond to them. And those responses, they feed into, they move into, they become part of memory. And so those areas, or those responses to memory, lead again to further questions to the human spirit. Those men who cannot answer by a superior wisdom these facts or questions of time serve them. Facts encumber them, tyrannize them, over them, and make the men of routine. The men of sense, in whom a literal obedience to facts has extinguished every spark of that light by which man is truly man. So that true spark is not found in knowing all the facts, all the historical data about memory, but instead it is the fire, the glow, also the afterglow of memory itself, if we are addressed by it and let ourselves be touched by it, that we become truly human. So don't conflate this with knowing your history, etc., your historiography, knowing the facts. Instead, you can read only one poem, only one text, perhaps Goethe's Faust, for example. And in Goethe's Faust, without knowing all the references and finding out whether Goethe is here correct or incorrect about certain statements or references, etc., which is what intellectuals would do. And instead, by reading, for example, Goethe's Faust, especially the second Faust, you'd be drawn into that realm of memory that is opened up here. But if the man is true to his better instincts or sentiment and refuses the dominion of facts as one that comes of a higher race, remains fast by the soul and sees the principle, then the facts fall aptly and supple into their places. They know their master, and the meanest of them glorifies him. See in Goethe's Helena the same desire that every word should be a thing. These figures, he would say, these Chirons, Griffins, Phorkys, Helen and Leda, are somewhat and do exert a specific influence on the mind. So far then are they eternal entities, as real today as in the first Olympiad. Much revolving them he rides out freely his humour, and gives them body to his own imagination. And although that poem be as vague and fantastic as a dream, yet is it much more attractive than the more regular dramatic pieces of the same author, for the reason that it operates a wonderful relief to the mind from the routine of customary images, awakens the reader's invention and fancy by the wild freedom of the design, and by the unceasing succession of brisk shocks of surprise. So here Emerson himself refers to Goethe, to a different work of course, but to Goethe's poem Helena. And Helena does make a return in the second Faust, and it is here also that Helena and Faust could potentially at least try to bridge, to marry antiquity with modernity, but fail. Now, this, now going beyond a bit what Emerson would say, of course, is also part and crucial to understand the workings of deep memory, that we cannot simply imitate or marry just about anything with anything else, but that instead what we must always attempt or first have is to let something else show itself of its own accord. And once we have taken the step back and have something else allowed to show itself, this other also then can overtake us and change us. And we, however, also, every time we encounter something, someone from the past, we transform that or them as well. Goethe called this Anverwandlung, to be changed by appropriation. And not just changing oneself, but really changing also so we are appropriated in a sense by that which we appropriate, but also what we appropriate is changed by us. A work that's been changed through a certain way of now reading it does change to a certain degree its meaning. We can try to set it in its original context, but we will always be reading it back from our time. Now, of course, at the other hand, there must also always be the attempt to see something in its own right and not just appropriate it in an aggressive manner. That's not what I mean to say here. And henceforth, in this way, come to the original sense of something, being mindful at the same time that the original sense has changed by our reading of it also. It's a sense that originally opens up with every reading. The universal nature, too strong for the petty nature of the bard, sits on his neck and rides through his hand, so that when he seems to vent a mere caprice and wild romance, the issue is an exact allegory. Hence Plato said that, quote, poets utter great and wise things which they do not themselves understand. All the fictions of the Middle Age explain themselves as a masked or frolic expression of that which in grave earnest the mind of that period toiled to achieve. Magic and all that is ascribed to it is a deep presentiment of the powers of science, the shoes of swiftness, the sword of sharpness, the power of subduing the elements, of using the secret virtues of minerals, of understanding the voices of birds, are the obscure efforts of the mind in the right direction. The preternatural prowess of the hero, the gift of perpetual youth, and the like are alike the endeavour of the human spirit to bend the shows of things to the desires of the mind. In the Persephorist and Amadis the Gaul, a garland and a rose bloom on the head of her who is faithful, and fade on the brow of the inconstant. In the story of the boy and the mantle, even a mature reader may be surprised with the glow of virtuous pleasure at the triumph of the gentle Genellas. And indeed all the postulates of elfin annals, that the fairies do not like to be named, that their gifts are capricious and not to be trusted, that who seeks a treasure must not speak, and the like, I find true in Concord, however they might be in Cornwall or Bretagne. Is it otherwise in the newest Romans? Before I continue here, sorry, just a brief remark on this. It's now obvious, I think, that, again, Emerson believes that there are epochs, and that those epochs shift and change, and that those epochs bring with them certain conditions that are universal to that epoch, so that whether one be in Cornwall, in England, or whether one be in what's today France, it matters not. The stories of the fairies and the aspirations of the alchemists, those are the same, because the age, they are of the same age. They are, to speak with Spengler, they are of the Faustian age. Is it otherwise in the newest Romans? I read The Bride of Lammermoor. Sir William Ashton is a mask for a vulgar temptation. Ravenswood Castle a fine name for proud poverty, and the foreign mission of state only a Bunyan disguise for honest industry. We may all shoot a wild bull that would toss the good and beautiful by fighting down the unjust and sensual. Lucy Ashton is another name for fidelity, which is always beautiful and always liable to calamity in this world. But along with the civil and metaphysical history of man, another history goes daily forward, that of the external world, in which he is not less strictly implicated. So Emerson makes a distinction between an inner world, which is the world of man, and also a metaphysical history, but also the external world, which would be natural. He is the compend of time. He is also the correlative of nature. His power consists in the multitude of his affinities, in the fact that his life is intertwined with the whole chain of organic and inorganic being. In old Rome, the public roads, beginning at the Forum, proceeded north, south, east, west, the center of every province of the empire, making each market town of Persia, Spain, and Britain pervious to the soldiers of the capital. So out of the human heart go, as it were, highways to the heart of every object in nature, to reduce it under the dominion of man. A man is a bundle of relations, a knot of roots, whose flower and fruitage is the world. A man is a bundle of relations, a knot of roots, whose flower and fruitage is the world. His faculties refer to natures out of them and predict the world he is to inhabit, as the fins of the fish foreshow that water exists, or the wings of an eagle in the egg presuppose air. He cannot live without a world. Put Napoleon in an island prison, let his faculties find no men to act on, no Alps to climb, no stake to play for, and he would beat the air and appear stupid. Transport him to large countries, dense population, complex interests, and antagonist powers, and you shall see that the man Napoleon, bounded that is by such a profile and outline, is not the virtual Napoleon. This is but Talbot's shadow. His substance is not here, for what you see is but the smallest part and least proportion of humanity. But were the whole frame here, it is of such a spacious lofty pitch, your roof were not sufficient to contain it. Columbus needs a planet to shape his course upon. Newton and Laplace need myriads of age in thick-strewn celestial areas. One may say a gravitating solar system is already prophesied in the nature of Newton's mind. Not less does the brain of Davy or of Gay-Lussac, from childhood exploring the affinities and repulsions of particles, anticipate the laws of organization. Does not the eye of the human embryo predict the light, the ear of Handel predict the witchcraft of harmonic sound? Do not the constructive fingers of Watt, Fulton, Whitmore, Arkwright predict the fusible, hard, and temperable texture of metals, the properties of stone, water, and wood? Do not the lovely attributes of the maiden child predict the refinements and decorations of civil society? Here also we are reminded of the action of man on man. A mind might wander its thoughts for ages and not gain so much self-knowledge as the passion of love shall teach it in a day. Who knows himself before he has been thrilled with indignation at an outrage, or has heard an eloquent tongue, or has shared the throb of thousands in a national exultation or alarm? No man can antedate his experience, or guess what faculty of feeling a new object shall unlock, any more than he can draw today the face of a person whom he shall see tomorrow for the first time. I will not now go behind the general statement to explore the reason of this correspondency. Let it suffice that in the light of these two facts, namely that the mind is one and that nature is its correlative, history is to be read and written. And I would add here, in this crucial section, that the way in which we can make or draw full sense out here from Emerson's remark is that we need to factor in memory. This is the work that I'm doing. I'm writing this in German at the moment, and I'm writing it by hand. So this is hence also my interest in this essay. Thus, in all ways, does the soul concentrate and reproduce its treasures for each pupil. He too shall pass through the whole cycle of experience. He shall collect into a focus the rays of nature. History no longer shall be a dull book. It shall walk incarnate in every just and wise man. You shall not tell me by languages and titles a catalogue of the volumes you have read. You shall make me feel what periods you have lived. A man shall be the temple of fame. He shall walk as the poets have described that goddess, in a robe painted all over with wonderful events and experiences. His own form and features, by their exalted intelligence, shall be that variegated vest. I shall find in him the foreword, in his childhood the age of gold, the apples of knowledge, the Argonautic expedition, the calling of Abraham, the building of the temple, the advent of Christ's dark ages, the revival of letters, the Reformation, the discovery of new lands, the opening of new sciences and new regions in man. He shall be the priest of Pan, and bring with him into humble cottages the blessing of the morning stars and all the recorded benefits of heaven and earth. Is there somewhat overweening in this claim? Then I reject all I have written. For what is the use of pretending to know what we know not? But it is the fault of our rhetoric that we cannot strongly state one fact without seeming to belie some other. I hold our actual knowledge very cheap. Hear the rats in the wall, see the lizard on the fence, the fungus underfoot, the lichen on the log. What do I know sympathetically, morally, of either of these worlds of life? As old as the Caucasian man, perhaps older, these creatures have kept their counsel beside him, and there is no record of any word or sign that has passed from one to the other. What connection do the books show between the 50 or 60 chemical elements and the historical eras? Nay, what does history yet record of the metaphysical annals of man? What light does it shed on those mysteries which we hide under the names death and immortality? Yet every history should be written in a wisdom which divined the range of our affinities and looked at facts as symbols. I am ashamed to see what shallow village tale our so-called history is. How many times we must say Rome and Paris and Constantinople. What does Rome know of rat and lizard? What are Olympiads and consulates to these neighboring systems of being? Nay, what food or experience or succor have they for the Eskimo seal hunter, for the Kanaka in his canoe, for the fisherman, the stevedore, the porter? Broader and deeper we must write our annals, from an ethical reformation, from an influx of the ever-new, ever-sanative conscience. If we would trulier express our central and wide-related nature, instead of this old chronology of selfishness and pride to which we have too long lent our eyes. So here, of course, the American Emerson, who is, in some sense, we could say, uprooted from Europe, thrown into the new world and coming to grips with it, he now calls for widening memory, widening, as he would say, history, but I would say widening memory. And again, he does not go into this. This is my thought. I think that we can find precisely in memory the capacity, the possibility to connect with other human beings from entirely different trajectories to ours, without homogenizing or destroying who they are. And still we're able to encounter them and read from them and with them, because we share in not a perennial substantive oneness, but because we do share in deep memory. If we would truly express our central and vital nature instead of this old chronology of selfishness and pride to which we have too long lent our eyes. Already the day exists for us, shines in on us at unawares, but the path of science and of letters is not the way into nature. The idiot, the Indian, the child, and unschooled farmer's boy stand nearer to the light by which nature is to be read than the dissector or the antiquary. And this is the end. So, this beautiful essay here ends with a call to a certain native look, a nativity in our consideration of nature, in our looking at and gazing upon the natural world, which is always also undergirding and intertwining and interweaving with the metaphysical history and with our civil history, as Emerson would call it. And this new look could precisely come from such a place as America, for its obvious freedom from certain metaphysical demands, as I have outlined elsewhere. Thank you very much for listening, and I don't know yet, to be honest, what I'll read next, but it might be Francis Bacon's New Atlantis. You will hear from me. Thank you very much. As you know, this is only available to subscribers who contribute and gift in a subscription, so contribute to my livelihood doing this. So I'd like to thank you all for supporting me, and perhaps you're learning from this, and if you do, feel free to share this also with anyone else who might be interested in these questions. Thank you very much indeed.